First Contact's Folly. High Archon Vilith of the galactic hegemony stood before the Great Assembly, his crystalline form refracting light across the vast chamber of the consensus spire. 300 representatives from the most advanced civilizations in known space hung on his every word as he delivered what would later be recognized as the most catastrophically misguided speech in galactic history. The primitives of Sol 3 have achieved rudimentary faster-than-light travel, he announced, mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among the Archons. They call themselves humans. Their achievement, while quaint, requires our immediate attention and guidance. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated chatter. The Moravian delegation's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with mirth. The quantum-based synthetics buzzed with calculated probabilities. Even the usually stoic Delphi Collective's representatives rippled their energy fields in what could only be described as condescending interest. They used nuclear fusion, Vilith continued, his crystalline form shifting to a shade of amused violet. Nuclear fusion. For FTL travel, like children discovering that rocks can make sparks. The assembled dignitaries shared what passed for laughter among their varied species. None of them noticed Ambassador Wren of the Delphic Collective dim slightly, their energy field fluctuating in what might have been concern. The hegemony's first contact team arrived on Earth with all the pomp and ceremony befitting their perceived status. They chose the United Nations headquarters in New York, descending in ships that bent light and gravity, a calculated display of technological superiority. The humans, led by Secretary General Patel, welcomed them with appropriate diplomatic protocols. They smiled, nodded, and asked all the right questions. If the aliens found it odd that humanity seemed unsurprised by their arrival, they attributed it to primitive minds being too simple to grasp the magnitude of the moment. "We come to welcome you to the galactic community," High Archon Vilith declared. His crystalline form deliberately shifted to project wisdom and benevolence. "Under our guidance, your species will be gradually introduced to proper civilization." Secretary General Patel maintained a pleasant, almost serene expression. "We are honored by your welcome and look forward to learning from the hegemony's vast experience." The first year passed in a flurry of technological gifts and cultural exchanges. The hegemony introduced humans to standardized galactic currency, basic antimatter handling protocols, and simplified faster-than-light communication systems. Each gift came with careful restrictions and monitoring protocols. For humanity's own safety, of course. None of the alien species noticed how quickly humans adapted to each new technology. None of them questioned why human ships, while crude, seemed to require far less maintenance than expected. None of them wondered why human colonies, despite their apparent primitive nature, achieved self-sufficiency so rapidly. The hegemony established their primary embassy in orbit around Earth, a massive structure of impossible geometry and crystalline beauty. Ambassador Wren, however, noticed something peculiar about human orbital traffic patterns. They never seemed surprised by the embassy's spatial distortions. Their ships never needed course corrections around its gravity wells. During a private consultation with High Archon Vilith, Wren voiced their concerns. The humans adapt too readily. Their learning curve exceeds all projected models. Vilith's crystalline form sparkled with dismissive amusement. They simply copy what they see, like all primitive species. Their understanding is superficial at best. But Wren had accessed human entertainment broadcasts. They had seen the centuries of science fiction that humans had produced. They imagined much of our technology before they saw it, Wren noted. Their entertainment contains theoretical models that... Fiction, Vilith interrupted. The random imaginings of undeveloped minds. Focus your attention on something more worthwhile, Ambassador. The hegemony proceeded with their standard uplifting protocols. They established trade restrictions, technological monitoring stations, and advisory boards for human scientific research. The humans accepted each new restriction with those same pleasant smiles and diplomatic nods. When the hegemony declared certain regions of space off-limits to human expansion, humanity filed the appropriate appeals and continued developing their existing territories. When the hegemony demanded oversight of human AI research, the humans readily agreed, showing them facilities filled with crude quantum computers and basic algorithmic systems. 5 years into this arrangement, during a routine inspection of human space, a junior analyst noticed something odd about Earth's power consumption. It seemed to fluctuate in patterns that didn't match their level of technology. Before she could file her report, however, her superior dismissed the findings as equipment malfunction. After all, everyone knew humans were still struggling with basic antimatter containment. Their space stations still used solar panels, their ships still required regular refueling, and their colonies still depended on simple fusion reactors. They were progressing exactly as expected for a primitive species under proper guidance. 10 years after first contact, High Archon Vilith stood again before the Great Assembly, delivering his annual report on human development. The Sol species continues to advance at an acceptable pace. Their technology remains centuries behind our own. Their scientific understanding is fundamentally limited, and their expansion has been successfully contained. Only Ambassador Wren noticed that the human diplomatic attaché present for the speech wore that same serene smile they'd seen 10 years ago. And only Wren noticed that the smile didn't quite reach their eyes. The humans were indeed advancing at an acceptable pace, exactly the pace the hegemony expected to see, precisely the pace that would keep them classified as a developing species, perfectly matching every model and prediction for primitive civilization development. Too perfectly, Wren would later realize. Far too perfectly. But by then, it would be far too late. Chains of protocol. 20 years after first contact, the hegemony's grip on human development had grown into an intricate web of regulations, oversights, and safety protocols. Every human advancement required 17 different permits. Every new colony needed 35 impact assessments. Every FTL-capable ship had to carry hegemony-approved monitoring devices. The Taraxian Trade Guild, led by Grand Merchant Ixal, particularly excelled at finding new ways to regulate human commerce. Their crystalline banking centers processed all human transactions, taking substantial processing fees for their troubles. It's quite remarkable, Ixal declared during a private session, with High Archon Vilith, their faceted body gleaming with satisfaction. They actually thank us for managing their economic development. Did you know they still use physical currency on some of their colonies? Charming primitives. The hegemony's monitoring stations recorded everything. Power signatures, communication patterns, ship movements. They watched human cities grow, cataloged their energy usage, and documented their apparently clumsy attempts at advancing their technology. None of them questioned why human power signatures remained consistently visible. None of them wondered why human ships always appeared on their sensors exactly when and where they should. None of them asked why every human development matched their predictive models with such precision. But deep in the quantum archives of the Delphi Collective, Ambassador Wren found something troubling. They had been analyzing human entertainment broadcasts again, their movies and games from before first contact. The humans had imagined monitoring stations. They had written stories about hiding from alien sensors. They had created entertainment simulations about maintaining false power signatures. During a closed session of the Hegemony Security Council, Wren tried one final time to raise the alarm. Their fiction, their imagination, they had conceived of every restriction we would place on them. They had created scenarios about circumventing exactly these types of monitoring systems. High Commander Zoilax of the Hegemony Defense Force flexed his war crystals in irritation. Ambassador, you waste the Council's time with human entertainment. Their crude attempts at imagining space travel barely grasped the basics of physics. But that's just it, Wren insisted, their energy field pulsing with urgency. Their early descriptions of faster-than-light travel, they're wrong in exactly the right ways. Their fictional power systems are flawed in precisely the manner we would expect. It's too perfect. The Council dismissed Wren's concerns. After all, their monitoring systems showed human development proceeding exactly as it should. Their sensors detected exactly what they expected to detect. Their analysis showed exactly what their models predicted they would see. Meanwhile, the restrictions continued to multiply. The hegemony declared the Carina Arm a protected cultural zone, just as humanity began showing interest in its resource-rich systems. The Taraxian Trade Guild implemented new safety regulations that tripled the cost of antimatter fuel for human ships. The Defense Force established training zones that just happened to cut off the most efficient routes between human colonies. Humanity responded to each new restriction with paperwork. They filed appeals through proper channels. They submitted forms in triplicate. They attended endless committee meetings and nodded politely at suggestions to reconsider their development priorities. When the hegemony demanded oversight of all human quantum research, humanity showed them laboratories filled with primitive quantum computers struggling to maintain coherence. When they insisted on inspecting human manufacturing centers, they found factories still working with basic robotic assembly lines. When they demanded access to human defense systems, they found laughably basic laser arrays and kinetic weapons. 30 years after first contact, humanity operated the most heavily monitored civilization in known space. The hegemony knew the energy output of every human fusion reactor, the trajectory of every human ship, the population of every human colony. They had humanity completely under control. Or so they thought. On a routine inspection of a human mining colony, Junior Observer Kix of the Monitoring Corps noticed something odd. The colony's waste heat signature matched their industrial output with perfect precision. Too perfect. Natural variations should have produced at least minor fluctuations. Before Kix could file a report, they received a transfer order to the Far Rim territories. Their replacement noted no anomalies. Everything matched exactly what the models predicted. In the Delphi Collective's quantum archives, Ambassador Wren found themselves increasingly isolated. Their concerns about humanity were dismissed as paranoid speculation. Their requests for deeper analysis were denied as wasteful of computational resources. Yet they couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The humans never complained about the restrictions. They never protested the regulations. They never attempted to circumvent the monitoring systems. They simply smiled, nodded, and complied. 40 years after first contact, during the centennial gathering of the Great Assembly, High Archon Villith delivered what would be his final speech on human development. The Sol species remains safely contained within acceptable parameters. Their technology develops at precisely the expected rate. Their expansion proceeds along predicted patterns. The success of our guidance protocols is absolute. In the audience, a human diplomatic attaché listened with that same serene smile that had never wavered in 4 decades. Beside them, Ambassador Wren's energy field fluctuated with growing dread. The humans were indeed developing at precisely the expected rate. Their technology was advancing exactly as predicted. Their expansion followed all projected models. Perfect compliance, perfect adherence to restrictions, perfect predictability. Too perfect. In the quantum archives, in the deepest layers of their analysis, Wren had finally found what had been nagging at their consciousness. They had discovered an old human term, buried in centuries of their entertainment broadcasts: malicious compliance. But by then, the hegemony's greatest mistake was already in motion. In their arrogance, they had decided to make an example of humanity's most promising achievement, the thriving colony of Nova Terra. They never realized they were about to provide humanity with exactly the excuse it had been waiting for. For 40 years, with infinite patience, with perfect compliance, with those same unwavering smiles. The breaking point. Nova Terra represented humanity's most impressive colonial achievement. At least, that's what the hegemony's monitoring systems showed. The thriving world of 5 million settlers, with properly primitive fusion reactors, basic atmospheric processors, and appropriately crude orbital defenses. High Commander Xylax himself delivered the evacuation order. Our sensors detect a critical quantum instability in the planetary core. For your own safety, you have 72 hours to evacuate. Governor Reyes of Novaterra maintained that same serene smile that had become humanity's diplomatic trademark. 72 hours to evacuate 5 million people. Surely the hegemony understands this is impossible. Then you should have planned your evacuation protocols better, Xylax replied, his war crystals gleaming. The timeline stands. When the deadline arrived, the hegemony's pacification fleet descended upon Novaterra. Their sensors showed exactly what they expected. A partially evacuated colony, primitive defenses, and helpless humans scrambling to escape. The fleet opened fire. Novaterra burned. The humans didn't protest. They didn't fight back. Their crude defensive systems fired a few token shots, missing exactly as expected. Their remaining ships fled in precisely the disorganized pattern predicted by hegemony models. In the aftermath, humanity went silent. Their colonies stopped transmitting. Their ships disappeared from monitored space lanes. Their power signatures winked out one by one. The hegemony celebrated. Finally, High Archon Villith declared, they learned their place. In the quantum archives, Ambassador Wren made one last, desperate analysis. Just before communications ceased, Novaterra's power signature had fluctuated for exactly 1/1,000,000th of a second. It had formed a pattern. A smile. Ghosts in the dark. The silence lasted precisely 30 days. The first sign that something was wrong came from the far rim. Monitoring stations began detecting phantom energy signatures, massive power spikes that appeared and vanished instantly. The hegemony sensors couldn't track them. Their models couldn't explain them. Then ships began disappearing. Not human ships. Hegemony vessels. They would enter standard patrol routes and simply vanish. No debris. No distress calls. No signs of combat. Just emptiness. The Taraxian Trade Guild's crystalline banking centers reported impossible data fluctuations. Account balances shifted without transactions. Resource allocations changed without authorizations. Every audit showed their systems were functioning perfectly, yet nothing matched their records. High Commander Xylax ordered a full military response. The Defense Force deployed its most advanced sensor arrays, its most powerful warships, its most sophisticated quantum detection systems. They found nothing. But in the darkness between stars, things were moving. Impossible things. Ships that didn't exist. Energy signatures that couldn't exist. Technology that shouldn't exist. The hegemony's monitoring stations kept reporting that everything was normal. Their sensors showed no unauthorized activity. Their models predicted no deviations. The models were perfect. Too perfect. Ambassador Wren, analyzing the patterns of disappearances, finally understood. The humans hadn't been adapting to hegemony technology. They had been playing with it. Reckoning. The end began at the centennial celebration of hegemony order. The entire Defense Force had gathered for a display of military might. 10,000 ships representing absolute dominion over known space. That's when humanity revealed what 40 years of compliance had hidden. Space itself cracked open, not through primitive human FTL methods, not through hegemony-approved jump points, but through rifts in reality itself. Ships emerged, sleek, black vessels with impossible geometries. Not the crude human ships the hegemony had monitored for decades, but machines that bent physics itself. The transmission cut across all frequencies, all channels, all quantum states simultaneously. A human appeared on every screen, every display, every sensory input device in the gathered fleet. "Greetings, High Archon," said Admiral Diana Santos, her smile exactly as serene as it had been for 40 years. "Thank you for gathering your entire military in one place. It makes this much simpler." Impossible. Villith's crystalline form shifted in panic. "Our sensors, our monitoring, showed exactly what we wanted them to show," Santos finished. "You saw what you expected to see. perfect compliance, perfect predictability, perfect primitives. The human ships, the real human ships, moved with impossible precision. They didn't fire weapons. They didn't launch attacks. They simply reached out. Quantum tendrils of pure mathematical force wrapped around the hegemony fleet. Reality itself seemed to bend. You see, Santos continued, while you were so busy restricting our primitive technology, you never asked why we accepted those restrictions so easily. While you were monitoring our crude attempts at quantum computing, you never wondered about all our pre-contact stories about artificial intelligence and digital consciousness. While you were tracking our primitive power signatures, you never questioned why we had imagined technologies far beyond them centuries before we met you. The hegemony fleet hung helpless in space, caught in forces they couldn't comprehend. We didn't need to develop technology along your approved paths, Santos explained. We had already imagined different paths, better paths. While you watched our approved research facilities, our real work continued in dimensions your sensors couldn't comprehend. While you monitored our primitive AIs, our actual digital intelligence evolved in quantum realms you never thought to check. While you tracked our fusion reactors, our zero-point energy systems powered everything you weren't meant to see. Ambassador Wren's energy field pulsed with final understanding. The entertainment broadcasts, they weren't imagination. They were prophecy. Not prophecy, Santos corrected. Research and development. Every science fiction story, every speculative technology, every imagined future, they were all test beds for ideas. By the time we met you, we had already conceived of and solved nearly every technological challenge you presented. We just needed time to perfect our implementations, time you gave us, while watching our primitive development. The human ships began to glow with impossible energies. You destroyed Novaterra, Santos said, her smile finally fading. An empty world, a staged colony, a trap waiting to be sprung. And now, after 40 years of watching us play with your toys, after 40 years of believing in your own superiority, after 40 years of perfect compliance, now you learn what humanity can really do. The hegemony fleet hung suspended in quantum grip of humanity's true technology, as the species they had patronized for 4 decades revealed what imagination, patience, and careful planning had created. And in the quantum archives, Ambassador Wren found one final human term that explained everything. Clarke's third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. The humans had simply decided that the opposite was also true. Any sufficiently disguised magic is indistinguishable from primitive technology. The age of hegemony control was over. The age of human innovation had begun. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, humanity smiled.